Hey, Richard, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really eager to talk about your book and kind of your life experiences and like what got you into jujitsu and what keeps you training after all these years. And just yeah, just can you just give a quick overview of kind of like what got you into jujitsu?
Um, you know, when someone says what got me into jiu-jitsu, it's not really what, it's who. Just that because I had what looks like a chance meeting with Rorion Gracie that answered an ad for a waterbed mattress. He came to my house and bought the mattress, got some sheets. As he's walking out the door, he asked me if I've ever done any martial arts, and I say no, and asked him why. Well, actually, I told him I boxed for a little bit, but literally enough just so I know how to hold my hands up and throw a punch. But um, so he started telling about his family and invited me for a free class, and the free class sold me. I mean, and the watermelon juice at the end of the class didn't hurt either. Just because he made it fresh he was a very nice, positive guy, very confident. And I just said, I want to, when someone says that my family's been doing the most effective martial art, self-defense for 65 years and we're champions, it's as much as part of me said, oh yeah, sure, you're from this family, like, and you just told me you don't have a lot of money and you barely can scrape by. And it's like, why don't people know about you? But I still kind of went like, okay, I got to check it out. And the rest is history. I mean, it was, just going over there and having a class and how we presented the class. It sold me. So, you know, my
Yeah.
jujitsu, my jujitsu, path begun in July of 1979.
What I find so amazing too in your book, I mean, your book I think is fascinating for anybody who's training jujitsu today. I think your book is fascinating because it really goes back to the roots of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in America. And you were student number one in this time where you start out training in a garage, right? And all of these people who've gone on to literally change the martial arts world, whether it's Horian or Hoist or any of the family, and Elio especially, you had front row seats for all of that, and you were there. I mean, how was that like when you look back on it? Does it just seem normal to you, or do you realize that you were there like sort of creating history?
Well, when I look back on it now, I mean, everything seemed normal in my life, um, because I mean, it was my life. It was just like, okay, I met this guy, and it was amazing. But I mean, it was my life. I never, I just thought I didn't know that I would teach years later, 10 years later and start teaching. I mean, I've been teaching now. This is my 30th year of teaching. And, I just thought I would be doing jujitsu, because one, it was fun. Two, it was effective. I became friends with Horian. I helped him with things. I loaned him money, helped him start the academy. But no one, I mean, I didn't think about the future and where I would be, like when we started the academy. I don't know where I would be. I didn't have any idea. It was my life.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. So I've been training with Henner and Hiron for 9.5, 10 years now, probably. I started at Beverly Hills, and now I'm down at the main academy down in Torrance. And it's just amazing to me, the explosion in the popularity and just how it just continues to grow, and just like emotional benefits, the physical benefits, all of the benefits that you get from jujitsu, was there a certain point where you realized, hey, this is really having this super like positive impact on my life?
Um, yeah, I think what happened last week. Um, it just, like I said, I wasn't really keenly aware when it started happening. My life changed. It changed in a direction that, I mean, I have not worked a full-time job in probably easily 30 years, just because, I've had other jobs that I did part-time. I did jujitsu. I also discovered how to do the kind of work that was done to me by this chiropractor. He taught me. So I've done that part-time. I've taught part-time and been semi-retired. I've done enough where I could make enough money to get by. I was never interested in how much money I could make. I mean, I was interested, but I didn't want a job that I didn't enjoy. I mean, when I I got sick back in 1989, a really bad bronchial infection. And it took me out for probably about 6 weeks. And I saw this chiropractor who also was an acupuncturist. And so he was treating me, and he had a library of self-improvement audios. Back then there were these little things called cassette tapes.
Yep,
Yeah.
I've used them.
A lot of people won't, there's a few older people that'll remember, but so, and he just, and he told me that he belonged to this club that was in a swap meet. So he said, check it out. So he loaned me some of the tapes to listen to, and then I joined the club. And every couple of weeks, I would go and check out a different audio. Brian Tracy, Tony Robbins, Wayne Dyer, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn. And one of the themes that they kept saying over and over again was find something that you love and then find a way to make some money at it. So it wasn't get a job and, like my dad once told me, he said, Richard, because I said, Dad, I don't like the food business. It's aggravating. And he said, Richard, he said, that's okay. You'll be aggravated, but you'll be rich and aggravated. And I said, screw that. That doesn't work for me. I don't care about, I don't want to be aggravated. So, I listened to these things and I went, okay, I don't know how it's going to happen, but that's what I put down in my mind. I want to find a way. I'll never be able to teach jujitsu. I mean, that's what I thought. Like, I'd like to be able, but I'll never be able to teach jujitsu. And I kept listening, and like I said, I've been teaching now for 30 years. And I think I've had some pretty good instruction on how to teach. And I think I'm a pretty damn good teacher. At least that seems to be the feedback that I'm getting.
Well,
So
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I can attest firsthand. It's something that we talked about the other night, was you do have a very infectious spirit that really sort of like, gets people inspired around, you sit down, you have a conversation with somebody about jujitsu and they get reinvigorated. And I know that one of the chapters in the book is, there's no such thing as a bad student, right? And so do you have any idea where that positive effect you have on people, do you have any idea where that comes from?
First of all, you mean this book?
You mean this one? Yeah, that's the one.
It hang tight. I just want to grab my water.
for sure.
You know, it comes from Rorion.
Oh, you're back. I was just reading my book.
You know, Rorion, you know, after like because there's a part in the book where he just got back from Brazil and I went through a really bad binge. Probably my last real bad binge. And the depression that followed the binge was, you know, anyone who does drugs, who uses them consistently, when you stop using them, you go through quite a depression. And I was depressed, but I was still going to jujitsu. But what it does to your brain is something that, you know, it just creeps on. It becomes you. And so when he would show me things, and in particular, there was a move that I couldn't pull off, and his enthusiasm for wanting to get me to do this move even made me feel worse about not being able to do it, because he said, like, just how easy it is, and do it like we're just like that, and then I'm like, I couldn't do it, and I'm like, oh crap. And so because I couldn't do it, you know, I went into that depressive kind of, you know, poor little Richard, he sucks, he's never gonna get good. And I went out to my car, and you know, I kept thinking about it, and you know, I started crying, and I'm like, you know, I'll never get any good, I suck, I don't know why I keep doing this. And so I'm sitting in my car for, you know, 10 minutes sobbing, thinking about it. And then Rorion saw me, and he came out and he said, what's the problem? And I told him, I said, you know, I said, why are you wasting your time with me? I mean, I'm never going to learn this. It's obvious. Look, I mean, this was my evidence. You know, here he shows me something one time and I can't pull it off. And I'm like, I'm not going to. I mean, when I look back at that, I realize how ridiculous my thinking was. But that's the brain of a person who was doing drugs. So when Rorion said to me, you know, everybody, you know, will learn when they're supposed to learn. And that's when he said, there's no, you know, there's no such thing as a bad student. And like I've said before to people, I honestly thought that he was lying because he needed money and he needed to teach jujitsu, and he would lie to me just so I would come back. You know, I mean, that's when my brain, and I went like, oh, okay, like, yeah, like maybe, but yeah, there's no such thing as a bad student. But me, I'm the bad student. And then after, when I saw a brilliant therapist who was outcome oriented, didn't care about what was happening at the time per se, it's what do you want to happen? And he kind of said the same thing, is he said that a lot of teachers aren't flexible enough to teach the way people need to learn. And so that kind of attitude is still something that, even in any communication with somebody, I remember the one thing that Dr. Dossi said to me. And he said, the meaning of the communication, the meaning of any communication, is the response that you get, not the intent. So you can have great intentions, but if you're not getting a good response from the people who you're dealing with, you can say to them, well, you don't understand me, and put it all back at them and say the same thing and go, what? You don't understand me. I just told you again. And if they're not getting a good, you're not getting a good response, we have to alter our behavior, alter the way we're communicating. Easier said than done, but it puts the responsibility back on me and takes it off the student or the client or anybody that I'm dealing with. Am I always successful? Hell no. But I still like to operate from that frame of reference. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it takes so much confidence and courage on the instructor's behalf to own the success of the student, right? And I'm sure that there are definitely some outliers where people just simply don't show up and they don't do the things. But for the instructor to take ownership of that, and to the flexibility that you mentioned, right? The instructor needs to be very, very flexible to each person's personal struggles, personal timelines and circumstances and whatnot. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that in training jiu-jitsu with the Gracies has really opened my eyes to, is how confident and flexible and patient that my instructors have been with me, because that scene in the book was something that hit very, very close to home for me, because I remember when I first got my blue belt, I was really struggling and I felt like I couldn't do anything right. And I was very down about it. And I had a very similar conversation with another instructor. Obviously it wasn't Rorion. And he was like, no, you need to recalibrate your definition of success. For me, my definition of success is to simply make it to class and come and train and do my best. It's made a world of difference for me.
Yeah.
So in your book, I mean, it is a very powerful, very intimate and sort of raw illustration of that journey that you've gone through. And is there any part where you look back now, is there any part where you could say, wow, I really wish that I could have enjoyed this part of my training and just knew that it was going to be okay? I guess my thing is, if you had the journey to do over again, would there be any certain parts of the journey you'd be looking most forward to?
You know, there was a guy that just he was at the black belt event at the Gracies a couple weeks ago, and he's a black belt, obviously, and I don't know if he has a podcast, but he for her Instagram he I forgot the guy's name, or I don't know how to spell it or pronounce it. Anyways, he was asking people like, you know, who you are and how old you are and how you feel, and if you had to tell your white belt something going back, you know, like what kind of advice. And one of the things that I said to him was, and I'm sure you've heard this, it's like you either win or you learn.
Yes.
Well, and I understand when they say that, but just like that first thing that happened when I went out to my car and was sobbing, obviously I didn't win, and I didn't see it as that I was learning. I saw it as that I was a failure and that I couldn't learn. So if I had to go back and really infuse this guy right here with something that would be, you need to believe this because it's true, and get those thoughts of failure out of your head, because the only true way that you fail, and I'm sure you've heard this, is not by not showing up. And you know but it took me a long time. I mean, a hell of a long time, because it was rooted in the outside, what was happening in my reality, because I was so ADD that when I go to class, started really in junior high school, where, you know, taking exciting subjects such as history and geography, you know, and you know what? I look back at some of the history. I really wish that I would have been more interested. I wish I would have had better teachers.
Yes.
But, you know, but because I wasn't interested, and, you know, they'd sit down, okay, read this chapter. I'd go home and I'd pick up a book and I'd go like, "Oh, it sure is a nice day out there today," you know. And I'd come back to the book and I'm like, well, that's enough. Time to go outside. I mean, my brain would just be all over the place. It was very hard for me to, even my own book, people have told me they've read it like 3 or 4 times. And I'm going, wow, I struggled to get through it once. Even with my life, you know, Scott captured it. And it it's not something that I do. That's not my strength. So when you look at what you're getting on the outside and you tell yourself certain things like, oh, I'll never be able to learn, that's where it came from. So a person tells me something. Honestly, I had teachers more than Rorion, other people, that when they told me that, I said, and I told them, I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to learn this. And they said, hogwash. He said, so it took me a while before I really believed that. And it would have been nice if I could just infuse it and bypass all the resistance of the internal voice that's telling you something about your life. I mean, I've talked to other people about this. I said, it's not real. It is not real. It's just what this thing called your brain does. It spits out information. Doesn't have to be real or not. And I've talked to people about fear and the whole thing. And I said, wait a second, how do you know you're afraid? That's one of the biggest things. And I've given the example of 2 people go up to a roller coaster. One is like really scared and the other one's going, oh man, that's great, that's exciting. And you get off the roller coaster and the person, I'm never going on that again, it scared the shit out of me. And the other person goes, oh my God, it's exciting, let's do it again. So what's the meaning of the roller? Is it you can be personally scared of it, but it's it's what we tell ourselves, and it can be scary and exciting. So it's all believing. And so, like I said, it's a long-winded answer for a simple question, but bypassing the resistance and just saying yes, just do it. Don't pay attention to that little thing over here on the shoulder that keeps telling you suck.
Well, that's a good one, right? I think that's probably one of the biggest changes that I've seen in my own personal life since training jujitsu and I saw a very funny meme one time on Instagram, and it said, either you win or you learn. And it said, I'm on a hell of a learning streak. And it showed somebody getting choked. And it made me laugh. It made me laugh out loud. But the internal dialogue is, you're right, it's not real, but it can impose some very real limitations on your life when you start believing it, right? And feeding into it. And like you were saying is, oh, here's another time, I'm not going to do it, I told you I couldn't do it. But finding a teacher that says, no, 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 that's the easy way out, you could do this. And then having the teachers like, a middle school history teacher who, doesn't necessarily care. Yes, student, it is your failure. I'm the teacher, I know this, it's your failure. As opposed to, middle school student, why are you not getting the material? Am I not putting it to you the correct way? That's a massive mind shift. And I think that it'd be important for people to recognize that and to start realizing that their potential can be so much more than listening to the negative voice in their head, right?
Yes.
So when I think about, some of these things, like the way that jujitsu has really evolved, right? So in some ways, definitely for better. It's like, jujitsu is available probably more now than ever before, at least in America. And it sometimes takes on a very personalized flair, right? And academy culture, school culture has a lot to do with it, right? So when you think about like a really good school culture, what does that look like to you?
Um, you know, That's a hard. I don't know if I can really adequately give the description of what it looks like to me, other than the kind of information and the kind of education that I got. But for me, it depends on the kind of school that you go to. And this goes back to the whole thing about where are we, what do you want to get out of jiu-jitsu? What's your number one goal to get out of jiu-jitsu? You know, I saw somebody on Instagram, I forgot who it was, you know, because one of the things that I started saying, I was the first person that I heard say this. And I think most people that do jujitsu, the majority, are hobbyists. It's a hobby. They're not going to enter into the UFC. They're not going to become world champions. The majority are just doing it for fun. It's a hobby. It's something that you enjoy. Yeah, you're learning something great from it. And I heard someone say, like, stop saying you're a hobbyist. Well, you know, whatever you want to say, but most people are. So we don't need to put pressure on ourselves. I mean, there's some schools that are sport, you know, and they're going, no, get back there, train, 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 train. I'm like, wait a minute. One of the most important things about training, especially as you get older, is how much rest you get in between training sessions. Any kind of training, you have to get at it. It was you that I was talking to about that.
We were talking about this the other night about needing to rest and intelligently. So yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think a lot of schools are really pushing, you know, train hard, train hard. And I see people saying, well, you know, should you go to class if you're injured? You know, that's a different thing. You can always go and learn, and by watching, and maybe even just depending on how bad your injury is, and not roll. But don't shame somebody for not going if they don't want to go, if you know, and especially if they keep getting injured. Look, I recently promoted somebody about a couple weeks ago. Guy's been with me for a while. He's a purple belt. Very good, 35 years old, built, you know, he's a little shorter than I am, weighs about 150 pounds. Very relaxed, very technical. He was rolling last night in class, and he rolled with a guy who had about 100+ pounds on him. Oof. And the guy is rolling, and they're both rolling easy, but you know, the bigger guy, you know, when you're that much bigger, you have to be aware of your mass. And he is. I've gotten to get him to slow down. He's a blue belt and climbing because, you know, one, he's a younger guy. I think he's 30 years old. Anyways, so as they were rolling, the bigger guy grabbed his ankle, and as he grabbed, and he was standing. The bigger guy was on the ground, and he started to spin around him, and he goes, oh, and he, like, his knee, he just felt like a little snap. So, you know, injuries happen. They happen even when you're protective. It's just the nature of it. But I think that when people get injured and their coach tells them to, like, really, like, come on, get in there, you know, just show up and do, you know, it depends. Like I said, if it's a hobby, you want to do something you're enjoying. You don't want to be, you know, scolded or shamed for not showing up or made to feel bad if you're tired and need to rest. And I think that's a lot of schools. And, you know, that's why I like about, you know, where I came from, you know, whether it be from the garage with Rorion to, you know, and then even after Rorion, I mean, I was lucky enough to be taught, you know, I had private classes with Rorion, quite a few with Hickson, you know, a couple with Hoyler, you know, the old man. people go, who's the old man? That you're talking about yourself? No, this was Grandmaster Rorion Gracie. So, and I was never made to feel, bad if I get injured. I mean, I remember one of the conversations, like, that Rorion had with his ex-wife, that he would say, well, Richard keeps getting injured. Well, it's the nature of the beast, but it's the way my body is. Can't help it. And now that I'm older, I'm glad that I didn't put more into it. I'm glad that I rested when I did get injured. But the Gracie University, to me, is just a prime example of how they, if you want to be a certain way, you can train hard. But if you want to do it as a fun type thing and as a great self-defense, you're not really pushed. And I've seen too many other coaches be the opposite as I've gotten to look. There's a few schools that aren't, but the majority, I think, is. So ideally, these guys are coming to learn. They want good instruction, and they want to train in a safe environment, as safe as possible. But
Gracie University was the one that I had in mind when I think that's where I train, right? And that's what I think is sort of like the epitome of good culture to me, because you're right. There are certain days where maybe I'm tired from work. I've had a long day. I want to come in, but I still want to see my friends. I want to roll, get in some light roll, definitely, train technique and keep up the consistency. On other days, I have more energy and I want to push a little bit harder. Maybe it's a Friday night. I can sleep in the next day. And you can find that wide range of that wide spectrum of how intense do you want to go. And, you have partners who become very good friends who are also on the same page. And that's definitely my picture of good culture. So in writing your book, right, and in thinking about putting your book together, like I said, it's a very, very personal, raw, emotional book. In writing it, did you have any hesitations where, oh, maybe I shouldn't share this? Or did you say, nope, I'm just putting it out there, just raw and unfiltered?
Well, I don't know when I spoke to you last week, if I said this to you, but, if I'm asked privately about certain situations, about how I started and where I was, and having just a one-on-one conversation, I would, I'm pretty much what you see is what you get. In other words, if you ask me something, I don't think there's anything good about hiding who you are. And so, I told people that, yeah, I've had issues with drugs, and, and I tell them my life, and a lot of people say, like, because, I'm so conscious of what goes in my body right now. But 40 years ago, it really wasn't like that. I mean, that's when I started to wake up. Well, I woke up a little before that, but I really started making those changes then.
Yeah.
Remind me your question. I just had a brain thing.
No problem. But actually, that was golden, right? And I think that the question I had is, you really shared from some deep places, right?
Yeah. So when I did tell the story, sorry,
No
my
worries.
brain kind of like went, let's make you look bad.
No problem.
When you tell your story to one person, it's like, okay, what's the worst though? That they might tell somebody, oh, did you know he had a drug problem? But you you put it out there, and it's like, wow. Like, because I've given this, book to, I mean, my neighbor, actually, he bought a copy, and other friends, and people have come back. Like this one neighbor who knows me, we never really had like super intimate conversations. We would just talk a little bit and share stuff, but he read my book, and a week later he saw me downstairs in the gym, And he goes, wow, Richard, he says, that you were so vulnerable in that book. And like I said, if I had a conversation with you, I would share just as much if you asked me the pertinent questions. So to put it out there on that kind of a scale, I was a little self-conscious about how it would be received, but I've had nothing but positive reactions to this book. And I'm glad that I did it, because you see like actors on TV, people in the public eye, oh yeah, I had a drug problem, I did this, and I'm like, wow, to share that, it's great that they're overcoming, but when it's you, it's like, wow. But this was my reality. I'm proud of myself for the changes that I've made in my life. I mean, when I look back, like probably now 45 years ago, and to see the rut that I was in, just the consistent drugs and being unhappy, and went like, wow, I could not imagine living the rest of my life with that kind of, not having a direction, or just eating, here I was in the fast food business. I didn't really give a damn what I ate. Like, unfortunately, like a lot of our society now, we don't realize the power of that. I mean, we all know that, like, oh, don't give the dog that, it might make him sick. So when other animals, oh no, you don't want to give them that, because, like, wait a second. But, oh, it's okay, because a human being is something different. Oh, we can go to McDonald's, not to pick on them per se, because Burger King, Taco Bell, they're all, it's garbage. It is absolute poisonous garbage to ingest that stuff. And I was doing it on a regular basis, because your body is an amazing thing, and it can get by on that. That's the thing. We can get by, but the problem is, you see how many people are, first of all, overweight, diseased, and the scientists go, oh, we found a cure for cancer. We're thinking that a vaccine will, like, wait a second. How about calling a spade and saying, look, it's these types of foods that are causation factors. So, it's approaching things at a different level. So when I see that meeting with Rorion, also when he talked about the Gracie diet, and he gave me that first glass of watermelon juice, and then at a different time I came back and he made me, most of us, especially back when I was a kid, well, and I'll say kid because I was, 27, 28 years old, when we think of getting a glass of apple juice, we'll look at, especially, and I'm talking back then, we would go back and, Mott's,
Treetop.
Yeah, Treetop, there you go. And you'd get a glass apple juice from a glass jar, and it was clear. So when he made me he took like 3 or 4 apples, peeled them, had a plastic grater, grated it by hand in a bowl, and then took the bowl and dumped the whole contents into a cloth bag and squeezed. I mean, this is as fresh as you can. It's not a juicer. I mean, it's not a juicing machine, because he didn't have enough money to buy one. And he made me, and I'm going like, whoa. I mean, it kind of like, well, wait a second. This is apple juice. This is the way we're supposed to what we're supposed to do, whether it's fruits or whatever it is, it's whole foods. It's out of the package, out of vegetable oils, which are absolute garbage for you. It completely revamped the way that you look. I mean, a lot of people see me now and they go, wow, Richard, you haven't changed in, 20 or 30 years. And I was, oh yeah, I have. I mean, but Okay, so do I look like the average person who's 71? I said, no. I mean, I still, most of my hair is brown, a little bit of gray here. I still have hair, which may be not all, you know. I think that my hair being brown has something to do with my diet. Not having hair could be genetic, but also it's people look a certain way because of what they put in their body. Period. I mean, genetics, I'm sure, has a factor. But when people, I never get guessed for my age.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's my whole life changed, and if I could not imagine where I would be today without these kind of changes in what I put in my body, and learning how to deal, learning how to be able to have a chance if I get into a fight, to protect myself, the confidence that I learned from this, and to have something where I can pass and teach to someone else.
So that's the thing right there. The one of the things that you touched on is well, actually there's a couple of different things. I have to admit there are a couple of different paths. The reason why I bought multiple copies of your book and given to good friends was not for like the historical jujitsu perspective, which is super cool. Like reading about the origins of jujitsu here in the US, it's super cool. I love this story. Most of the time I've given the books to friends, it was because they were in a rut in their life, right? And it was like the domino effect. Maybe they didn't like their work situation or their life situation, and then the habits that they had trying to sort of numb down their dissatisfaction with life was putting them in a bad place. And so it's kind of like you did go through and you walked the walk. You got yourself out of your rut. And I know that when we were talking the other night, we were talking about jujitsu is that catalyst for you, but you were also ready to change, right? And it's like sometimes it's believing you can do it is such a big thing. So when I would get the book and I give it to my friend, I'm like, here, like read this, right? And it's they walk away with different perspectives of, you know, beating addiction, right? And taking control of your life and having small but very good habits that build up over time. Because to your earlier point, which is a really good one, I think that there are a lot of people who are very into short-term fixes for everything. Okay, it's like, heart disease. Well, here, take this pill. Well, you can also fix it if you get in front of it early with a good, healthy diet, good exercise, and just sort of live clean life. So that is a super powerful aspect. And I guess when it comes to creating those habits, or better yet, maintaining those habits, how much of an impact did your peer circle changing have on you?
Well, I mean, the people that when I started jujitsu, I was hanging out with a bunch of people who I was basically getting high with. That was those were the friends that I had.
Yeah.
I was also dealing on a very small, I even hate to say dealing. It's just that, I didn't like to pay for my own drugs. So I would buy in bulk, not like not like I had, armed guards. And, it's like if I wanted, an ounce of pot, I said, okay, maybe if I buy a pound, and when this person wants something, so I can get my own stuff paid for. Statute of limitations, I think, for marijuana, dealing is, I think it, doesn't span like, more than a few years. So I'm good. But, like with Quaaludes, I would buy 100 and sell 80 of them just so I can have my drugs paid for. Again, here, what, and I left my, what was the point of me saying this?
So your peer group, like I am.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But the other was interesting too, for sure.
yeah, but so the guys that I was hanging out with, they liked me because, for a certain amount of a period, and I think the book refers to it, I was known as the Candy Man. And but when my lifestyle changed, and that went on for, year and a half, 2 years. But when my lifestyle changed, I didn't buy like that anymore, which means that I wasn't the person. One, I didn't want to be around people who were getting high all the time anymore. So, right. And I realized that, from a lot of the audios that I was listening to, it's like you want to, look at the people that you're associating with. And because I was told a long time ago, another wisdom from Dr. Dossi. He said that you cannot not be influenced. Every single thing in your life that you're around, and if you're around something for a lot, you're going to be influenced. You either are the influencer or you're the influenced. Yep. Period. You're not neutral. So be careful about who you're associating with, because you will become a product of that environment. So I realized that I didn't, it's not that the guys I was with were bad guys. I had no interest in getting high anymore, after a while. So had to find different people to associate with. So, yeah. So, and I think that making the transition is so many factors. There's so many things involved, because, everyone, when we make a new goal in our life, let's say we want something, and if we don't get it, whether we want to change our diet or whatever, if all of a sudden we do something and we slip back into our old way temporarily, it's probably the biggest thing is, what do you do with those types of thoughts? And that's what stops people. That's what keeps people coming back, because they will, like with me, for whatever thing you say to yourself, because when I wanted to change my diet, and I had living with Rorion for a year, it was so much easier for me to do that than when you talk to somebody and you share a meal with them and you give them a little. But when you're eating meals with somebody at least twice a day, Rorion and I would either eat breakfast together or eat dinner together, just depending on the day. If he was teaching, we'd probably eat at about the same times. So it's very influenced for me to be around him like this. So when he would leave, and if all something, I still had those cravings and still had those habits. But and even when I stopped using drugs, if I slipped and got high, I would, it's a lot of people, what they do is they beat themselves up. And, again, it's something that, because our brains see us at a failure. We don't see it as we're learning. We see it as, oh, I slipped, I suck. Oh man, I'm such an idiot. It's those kinds of things. So, someone asked me about if I wrote a second book, they said, oh, I want to hear more stories. Yeah. It wouldn't be jiu-jitsu. It would be how to make that change and go forward, and how to deal with that critical thinking voice that is a part of you and me and everyone else out there, how to deal with that.
I would personally love to read that book, because it's an interesting point, right? Either the immediacy or the permanence of an issue, or the ability to learn. Like if somebody backslides, it's early in the new year, and I'm sure a lot of resolutions have already been broken. And you're right, there's two ways to look at it. I suck, this always happens to me, I shouldn't even set a resolution, versus, okay, well, listen, I slipped up, but where did I slip up so I can be better next time, right? And if you're with a more positive peer group, then you can gravitate towards that, as opposed to constantly having those potential pitfalls, around every corner. And so going back, like, to something completely different, but something we talked about the other night, which I thought was super cool, was the need for fundamentals in jujitsu, right? And it's the need for fundamentals. And there is like this sort of sacred service that a jujitsu instructor, is providing to their students when they're talking about self-defense. Do you want to talk about just like the need? And I don't know if there's really even a question in there, but it's just like, can I get your thoughts on like the value and the importance of really understanding the fundamental techniques, and sort of like their role as being building blocks in future training? Did that question make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So, this is something I'm really passionate about, is that there was a guy that I met about a year ago who read my book, and he contacted me via Instagram, and he said, I'm a writer, and I'm writing a story for LA Magazine about the fighting scene in California. And he said, after reading your book, he said, you're kind of at the forefront. I'd love to interview you. So I said, yeah, sure. I said, we're good. And I didn't know where he was. So I think I told you this, and he said he's in Santa Monica, and he also is on 4th Street. So we met, and he's a 65-year-old white belt, and but he's bigger. We met at Gold's Gym where he works out, and and he's like a 65 back then, maybe 1-stripe white belt, but 6'2", 205, solid guy,
Solid
still
guy.
solid. And he was training at a local school here. I won't mention any names, but hi, I'm on a podcast right now. I can't talk. But okay. So he was training at school, and so we've gotten to be friends over the years, over the year. And a few months ago, he said, "Oh yeah, Richard," he says, "so today we learned how to, defend the triangle." And I said, "That's good." And he says, "Yeah, except I don't know the triangle. I really don't know how to do it." I said, "Okay." And they said, "We also learned to defend the rear naked choke." I said, "I really don't know how to do the rear naked choke." So, and that's the problem, is that there's not enough places that offer beginning curriculum for fundamentals, for the foundational moves of jujitsu. You just kind of go into a class, and it's kind of a hodgepodge of different levels, and you might come in one week and learn the defense for the triangle, and it might be your first time in class. It might be your 4th month in class. But basic fundamental things, Americana arm lock, Kimura, guillotine, stuff like that, there was such a need for it. I also taught a private student a few months ago, could have even been a year ago. He came in with one of my students, and she goes, "Richard, I want to bring my friend in." And this guy, is quite a bigger guy, and so he hadn't done jujitsu in a while. And I said, "Where did you train?" He goes, "I trained at this local place." And I said, "Okay, how long you were there?" "I don't know, maybe 6 months." And then he said, "I was off because of the pandemic, and then ran into one of the teachers there, and he's a brown belt, and I started working with him. How many classes do you have? I don't know, maybe 8, 10 classes. I said, okay. So he comes in, takes a private. I said, show me the collar choke. He goes, I don't know the collar choke. I said, okay, show me the guillotine. I don't know the guillotine. Okay, so show me the triangle. You had private classes, you've had, beginning classes or classes for a few months. I don't know this. I'm like, I was so frustrated teaching this guy. And I said, first of all, I'm not frustrated with you. Just so you know that. I said, I'm more frustrated and angry at the person who is teaching you. He says, yeah, because we're working on, some guard passing. Great. But how about learning some basic stuff? I mean, and this goes back to where when I started teaching at Krav Maga, 20 some odd years ago, guys would come in from different schools. I remember one guy came in and he was training footlocks at do you know who Gokor is?
Yeah.
Okay, well, he was training at Gokor's place, and he was there for a few months, and he got to learn like leg locks and foot locks, and he came in and he couldn't catch anybody. And then about 6 months of being in my class, just showing him how to set the stuff up, showing him the fundamentals for this, he started catching people. So the problem is, again, a long-winded story for the problem, is that the Gracie Academy has combatives. You can come in and learn the basic fundamental self-defense core types of moves in that class. If your school doesn't give you a basic fundamental class to start in, or to have a fundamental instructor, you're missing a lot. And, it's something that I see more and more. And, like the boys over there, and I'm sure Hoyler, I'm sure there's a few other guys that are very, have fundamentals, but not enough of them. And it's really frustrating. I don't want to learn the fancy stuff before I learn the core fundamental stuff.
That's a really good point. And that's kind of like what I was trying to get to, because a major motivator for me here with the podcast is for people either who have never trained or people who have trained in the wrong type of school and have misconceptions about jujitsu, right? Because it's very easy if you go to a school that doesn't really have a foundation and you train for 6 months or you train for a year and you still don't understand the fundamentals, and that can be very confusing because the fundamentals are the building block for everything, right? And so, yeah, so thank you. I think that that's something that the Gracies have done really, really well, is structuring through combatives, and also with Master Cycle, it's module, it's chapter based, and you know what chapter you're going to train, and you get good repetition on the foundational and also the sort of the enhanced slices. And so that's definitely a big thing for me, is having the foundational stuff in place before trying to get too fancy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm working on, with that one guy, his name is Tom. We're working on a curriculum to kind of to present to school owners, so maybe they might be interested in having a couple classes a week where it just shows people like the core stuff, escape from the mounted position, all these little basic type position that need to be understood and learned before you start showing the defense for it. How about showing the move?
Yeah, and when you understand the move, it makes the defense that much easier, right? Because you understand the context of it.
Yes.
So,
So
so we're running. So I want to be very respectful of your time as well. And so I think we just have a few minutes left to go. Were there any, and also for my listeners, I'm definitely going to put a link to Richard's book. It is a absolute must read. I'll put a link to the book, Richard's socials and whatnot. I would strongly suggest you check it out. But Richard, before we go, were there any other like last points to raise? And also, I'd love to have you on as many times because I literally could talk all day about this stuff with you. I find it fascinating, but I also find it very insightful and very responsible and useful for jujitsu practitioners, people in life, just in life. So I would love to have you on absolutely anytime you wanted to come on. But were there any other sort of like last thoughts or last things you wanted to drop?
you know, I guess, I'm glad that you said you gave it to the book to people that maybe definitely were not jujitsu people, because I spoke with a woman a couple days ago who I knew from back when I was working in Topanga Plaza. So this was back in the 70s, before jujitsu.
When they used to
And
have an ice rink in the place, right?
yeah, that's right.
I used to play hockey there sometimes.
Yeah. So, there was a girl who worked next door in the bank, and we got to be pretty friendly, and we'd always talk. And so when she left, I, we lost touch. She went on with her life. She got married, had kids, and, lost her husband last year. So, I said, hey, let's have a conversation. So we talked for a little bit, and she told me that she has a book club. And I said, you know what? You might want to look at my book, because it's not just a book about jujitsu. Because I dated a girl that worked in Topanga Plaza. She was up at Kenny's shoe store like a long time ago. I mean, we're talking when I was like, maybe 24 years old. And her and I stayed friends throughout the years. She's been married now for probably 30 years. And, she's an avid reader. I mean, this woman probably reads close to a half a dozen books a month. And she read my book and she goes, wow, Richard, I learned much more about you after reading this book. She goes, I learned about jujitsu, and I learned other parts of your life. And she goes, this was it's not a jujitsu book. It's a book that talks about jujitsu, but there's so many different aspects of this book. And, a book about positive change in your life and personal struggles, and that you can do it. So I'm glad that you're not the first people saying that I've given this book. And when I was talking to Scott originally about this book, he goes, Richard, you have something here. And I went, well, yeah. I never thought that this would be something that, people would be inspired by. And I've become extremely proud of the book. And I'm glad, I'm pleased that you're buying them for friends, because not just those people, but I think that, when I've asked certain people going to school, I go, do you guys, in jujitsu, I go, do you know the name Rorion Gracie? And they go, no. And I'm like, wow.
They should.
This is 43 years ago. I says, this is the reason you're here. And some would say also because of my help with them, that, because I supported, helping with the, look, I loaned money to Rorion early on to help him out. the money for the academy, the money for the UFC, or part of the money for the UFC. I mean, I never thought about it as like, oh, this will come back to me. Like it's just like this. What I wanted to see jujitsu. So to be part of this, I think is amazing. And as far as coming back on your podcast, anytime. I love to talk about this. I want more people to know about this book. And we have a huge, I mean, look, we've sold, under 5,000 units between audio and whatever. There's more than 1 million people worldwide that do jujitsu. At least.
Countless others who need it, whether they train jujitsu or they're never going to train jujitsu. It is a book for life, for sure.
Right. But because of jujitsu too, especially in the US, I mean, it's out there. And I'm glad that we have people such as yourself that are sharing this. And I appreciate that. And I'll send you your residual check. It won't come anytime soon. But no, I appreciate that. And like I said, I'd be happy to come on, So
like I said, I really appreciate you and your generosity and just your insights. And it's when I was trying to explain to one of my friends, when I gave him the book, I said, to me, it's the most powerful type of self-help book because it's not a glossy, hey, my life is perfect and I'm writing from this position of I've never made a mistake in my life. And here's how you can be like me. You're like, here, this is where I was. This is how the whole thing, unfolded. Do with this what you want, right? Like never in the book were you preachy. You're too humble, in my opinion. I will definitely continue to spread the word. And what was funny, if you want one quick piece of trivia, is my first copy that I bought a long time ago, I gave to Sam Fernandez. And because Sam, I consider Sam a friend. And I said, Sam, this book blew my mind. And he's like, oh, I wanted to check this out. So Sam had my original copy. And yeah, I've got multiple copies around the house. And I've definitely handed out, I would say I'm probably about 15 books in now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. And I've written some reviews too. That's for sure. When people read the book, they have to write a review.
Yeah, you know what? I appreciate that too. It's something that, because I get a lot of people that come back to me, they'll send me messages and they'll thank me. And, and I appreciate that. But I say, look, if you appreciate it, the thing that you can do to help me is please leave a review on Amazon, because those things are so powerful. Because, it's nice to, because what we'd like to do eventually, the goal is to be picked up by a publisher.
Yes.
Where they can do some marketing instead of us doing this. And if we don't, great, it doesn't happen. I never, ever thought that it was going to go any further than, maybe selling a few hundred copies.
It's too good to not be picked up nationally, and that's, and obviously I have no vested interest in saying that, but I do have a deeply personal interest in saying that because I believe that it can really change people's lives for the better. So on that happy note, Richard, thank you so much for taking your time out to do this, and definitely look forward to having you back on again.
Sounds good. Look forward to coming back anytime.
Awesome.